I said that on behalf of Banco Sabadell, I would like to welcome Professor Lucas and express my gratitude for joining us in this 34th edition of the Barcelona Graduate School Lecture Series. We have some lectures of distinguished economics professors from time to time here in Banco Sabadell, and that is what constitutes the Barcelona Graduate School Lectures. I also want to welcome you, extend my warm welcome to all of you, the students and members of the Barcelona Graduate School of Economics, and to all the participants in this seminar. I think that, well, Professor Lucas requires almost no introduction. I mean, when I studied in the University of Minnesota, like many of others that I see here, you know, Professor Lucas had a big crowd of followers in the university that were teaching us about rational expectations and about the micro foundations of macroeconomics. So, you know, it's as if he had been my professor. He has never been. I never met him before, but you know, through Tom Sargent and through Chris Sims and through Wallace and through the other teachers at the University of Minnesota, you know, all his research and all his teachings were, you know, made it through. I think that, you know, the cooperation between Barcelona Graduate School and Sabadell started in 2006, and it has extended well beyond these lectures. You know, in addition to that, we are patrons of the Barcelona Graduate School Foundation, which is the academic, and aside from that, we have a lot of personal, academic and professional ties with all the people that are here. So, you know, I'm not going to do the difficult job of presenting the length and remarkable contributions of Professor Lucas to economics, but that's the job of Marcet, or Professor Marcet, who will have this difficult task. Okay, you know, I certainly have a curiosity and wish to listen to his words. That's a pleasure, and it's a big thing for us, for Banco Sabadell here, especially because he has chosen to discuss something that interests us. What was the industrial revolution? You know, that's not. I don't know if it will come as a macroeconomic model or not, but at least we are eager to listen to you. Thank you very much for being here, and please, Professor Marcet, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for being here too.
Thank you. First, welcome, Professor Lucas and everybody. So I'll try to be brief. Of course, it's not my talk, but I would like to say a few things. So just very quickly, Professor Lucas, he finished his PhD in Chicago, 1964, and he started his work. He started to work as a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, which is a very good place to start your career. And then moved to Chicago in 1975 and got the Nobel Prize in 1995. Now, it's difficult to describe the career of such an excellent career without looking like you're exaggerating, but I'm going to read from Wikipedia. It says, which is an authority, and it says that Bob Lucas is one of the most important economists of all times. Okay, so the thing that he, along with others, but very much he did in the 70s was to change completely the way we study macroeconomics. So they introduced an explicit way of modeling expectations, so that expectations of agents, of consumers and investors are driven by the model that you write down. And they started introducing, if you want, microeconomic analysis in the analysis of macroeconomics. This changed the way people understood macroeconomics so much that when I started my PhD in Minnesota in 1982, we were taught macro in the way, you know, the new way. according to the rational expectations of revolution, if you want it. And many of the students taking the PhD then were saying, but this is not macro. Where's the ISLM? Where is the IS curve? Where is the LM curve? And I remember these discussions. No, but this is macro. No, but what is the difference between macro and micro? So the difference was, in the approach was enormous. But by the end of the 80s, I would say, most graduate programs would have been like that. Okay, so the change happened very quickly, and it was very influential. Basically, because the way you look at macroeconomics is as a system that responds to policy. And once you this is a very simple idea, perhaps, but one that had been ignored previously. When you intervene, when you change your policy, you have to not only think if that's good in principle, but you have to think how the economy will react. And taking that into account is what they started to do. Now, this is a very quick description of his work, but I would like to highlight two things of his work. One is the enormous diversity of interests that he has had, the many different applications in many areas of his work. So in part, it must be because he and a few others were there first. No, they got first to this world of different new macroeconomic models. So this reminds me, in Catalonia, there's a very important hobby is looking for mushrooms. This is people are obsessed with it. There are twice in the year there are traffic jams in the roads that go to the mountains, and it's in ski season and in mushroom season. So, and one rule if you look for mushrooms is don't look where everybody else looked. No, you have to look you have to look somewhere that nobody went, and in part perhaps because of that, but the range of topics that where Professor Lucas made a huge impact is very wide. For example, he made key contributions to monetary theory, studying the role of money, the effect of the quantity of money on prices, studying the Fisher equation. He made a huge contribution in asset pricing, one of the first equilibrium asset pricing models, asset pricing papers was by him, and then a huge literature ensued. He had a big impact on models of endogenous growth with a paper discussing various engines for growth. He had a huge impact on models of taxation and fiscal policy, and huge impact on measuring business cycles. We were all reading his papers as they came out and tried to understand them, and maybe 20 years later we are still trying to understand it. My graduate students are still working on his papers. Many of his work he did with Nancy Stokey, who is here, and his wife, and one of the good things of having Bob Lucas around is that he comes with Nancy, and then we have both of them. So, for example, I spent a week last week talking about Lucas and Stokey paper of fiscal policy, and they wrote together a very important textbook, which for a long time was the key textbook and still is in macroeconomics. Some of my friends in graduate school called it the Bible, but that was probably an exaggeration, but anyway. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that Bob Lucas is a true academic, okay? You see sometimes people win the Nobel Prize. I thought it was only in economics, but it happens apparently in all fields, that sometimes people get the Nobel Prize and then they kind of stop working. Maybe they stopped working a little bit before even. This was not the case here, and he has kept contributing many interesting and important papers. Since then, you get to talk to Professor Lucas and he asks you, what are you working on? And he gets into what you are working on. And for example, what he's talking about is today is also, as Julia Puliu mentioned, a very is a show. It shows how diverse his interests are. So, for example, I remember the first time I met him, I was a graduate student, and he was working on this paper on endogenous growth. And I said, what are you working on? And he said, well, I'm working on this paper on endogenous growth. And it's really a lot of work because I have to read all these papers that have been read and have been written on development and growth. So I was really surprised. I thought Bob Lucas knew everything, no? But actually, he was going through all this literature, teaching a course on all that literature, and he bothered to read what had been done before he wrote a paper on it. And I'm very happy to have him here, and looking forward to the talk.
Well, thank you very much. I'll probably spend the next 15 minutes trying to figure out how to work with this. So this is about the Industrial Revolution, which I've been thinking about, not very productively for years. And every now and then I get another idea for a step forward. So this is one of those steps. Here's just start with, you can read it yourself. Wait, can you? I'm looking at a different. So I can't just use this keyboard.
It's just working.
Huh?
It's working, it's working. It's okay.
Okay, this is great.
You can just
I get it. I don't
Yeah?
want this at all. If I can
No?
avoid it, I like to. This is a statement at the start of at the first page of the Cambridge Economic History of Europe by Cole and Dean, which I think is just states so clearly and beautifully what the problem is that we wanted to talk about when we talk about the Industrial Revolution. The modern period in world history distinguished from all past periods because of economic growth. I mean, economic growth at a sustained way just didn't appear anywhere in this world until maybe the middle of the 18th century, and now it's routine for a pretty good part of the world. It's a completely new world in a sense, and the question I want to think about is, why did it happen? Why didn't it happen? I mean, centuries of smart people developing new ideas. You know, much of the work that we read and value is long before the 18th century. But nothing like the sustained growth occurred, and all of a sudden it's routine. Now, so how did all these centuries of subsistence living for people without land or without much land move itself into a world where ordinary working people can count on doubling their incomes every generation? Now I like this. E.A. Wrigley, who calls this a problem of the Malthusian fertility, and this I think is right. The Malthusian, what kept this system down, what keeps working people down to some subsistence level, is a Malthusian model which accurately described most of macroeconomics in the old days for centuries, and then it disappeared. We somehow got past that. Why? How did it work? Let me just talk about some data that I'm gonna just some data that I'll just put a couple things on. This is, if you went to Tim Keogh's talk yesterday, you already saw this paper, this picture. I'm plotting the log of per capita income for a whole bunch of different countries. Each one of these dots is a country in 1980, and then the vertical line is the fraction of your labor force which is engaged in agriculture. So you see in the upper left-hand corner, that's mostly African now. But everybody in the rest of the world is on it, and the countries like the United States and Europe are down at the bottom right-hand corner. And over time, if you look at successive periods, all these guys are kind of drifting down this hill that I've grown here. So before the industrial, everybody was up in the 80, 90%. That was where human life was for years. There were some rich, very wealthy people we know from ancient times. I mean, the pharaohs and the Romans, and but these were people who lived off the land and other people's labor, and they could become fabulously rich. And what we talk about as civilization is those people, but the rest of us are in this 90%. And it's that's changing, and changing gradually over time. Speaking of over time, this is a cross-section of 1 year. Here I'm looking at some Kuznets numbers, which I added on for 2000. Here I'm plotting the same thing about employment shares in agriculture not against income, but against time. So let's just switch to income. Now we get this curve. This is a time series from 1800 to the present. UK is a little bit different. The UK is a lot different in this whole thing because of their role in the Industrial Revolution. Now let me just show you. I drew a line for for the cross section. Exact same curve fits the time series. So this movement down this grade is kind of a tight connection between. I call this a tight connection, but I'm just an economist. It's pretty good as our curve fitting goes, and. And I'm going to build on it. This idea of this agricultural sector and the rest is what Arthur Lewis and Theodore Schultz and other people called a dual economy, and a dual economy is going to be the center of everything I'm doing. Now, a second fact I was to talk about. Is this fact that Wrigley raised about what happened to the Malthusian model? Why did it break down? And let me just show you how that it did break down by some other pictures. Here I'm plotting against time. The blue curve is the UK GDP per person, and the red curve is the population. The red curve doesn't, they're different units, so you can shift up the red curve any way you like here. So you can see that, forget about the 1700 stuff, most of that's probably just made up numbers. When you get up to close to 1800, you can see that the population growth in the UK is moving pretty well with, this is total population, I'm sorry, not per capita income. The population and production are pretty close to one another. Maybe they're getting a little bit wider. And then around 1850, the production, the GDP just takes off. You can see it curling up, and you can see the red curve flattening down. So it's this demographic transition means first as you get richer, you have more population, and then it turns to just more richer and less population. Now this happens in every society. Here's France. Here's the U.S. The U.S. is a little bit different because we're huge immigration populations, so that the population size keeps growing pretty fast for completely different reasons from UK. Here's Japan. Now the more recent ones, let's look at Mexico. It's not really taken off until maybe late 50s. I mean, they're growing, but they're growing in population at roughly the same rate as they're growing in. And then you start seeing, you're starting to see the demographic transition happening in Mexico. They're making it. They got a long way to go, maybe, but they're headed in the right direction. Here's my last one I'm going to show you, Nigeria. Now here I'm starting from 1950 because Nigeria doesn't have, that's when Nigeria, they got their independence in 1960. And they're growing like mad, so it's not, they're getting, much more production, but it's all coming out in terms of population. There's pretty much no different, they haven't started on the demographic transition there. And so those are the differences. I mean, this curve we're talking about, it's over for the United States and the UK and the rest, but it's just beginning for people in Africa and Southeast Asia, which is, most of the people in the world. All right. So my question, is what happened to the Malthusian model, and what brought about this demographic transition. And I'm going to follow, Gary Becker's been thinking about this for a long time, and he started out by looking at cross-sections of people in Indianapolis back in 1960, that the rich guys in Indianapolis have smaller families than the middle class and the poor people. This is a tiny piece of evidence that we wouldn't look at now, but in those days you had to fight for your data. And Becker starts, are people in terms of an economist, are having more children bad? Do we dislike children? He figures, well, no, that's we love our children, and there's got to be two factors involved, and he called them the quantity-quality trade-off. You like more kids, they are a good, but you also like to give each child as much benefit as you can, and those two things are pulling, that's another good, quantity and quality of children, and they're pulling in the opposite direction. And maybe that was how he worked out the Indianapolis thing, and then it seemed to be more and more applicable to long time series like I'm talking about. Here's more work of Becker's that I've used, and I guess I'll get to that in a moment. So what do I want to do? First, I want to talk about a Malthusian model of traditional farm workers, a pre-industrial relation thing. It'll be a simple model, and I'll work it out, in a Malthusian way. Then I want a standalone model of a human capital world, where land really contributes nothing, and look at how that model gives you potential for sustained economic growth. And then I want to put them together. Put them both in the same society. You can move from one to the other, and see how it works. And what's supposed to happen is an industrial revolution. And I'll get to it. So let me start with a land-based economy. And this is a little model. Everybody in this thing is identically the same. This is only an economist could think of this, right? We all have the same preferences. The only reason we behave differently from our neighbors is because we have some different situation facing us. But our basic needs and wants are the same. So I'm thinking about the things that give you pleasure are this function W of C and N and V. C is how much goods you get as a parent. I'm not going to get into husbands and wives here. That's I'll leave that to Becker. And then N is the number of children you have, and a third thing is the benefits, the value you leave to your kids. Now I'm talking here about a agricultural family which has some is X units of land. So now his X units of land plus his own. Okay, so he's trying to maximize the pleasure he gets out of his consumption, the number of children he has, and the amount that he can leave to his children as you know, basically he's going to pass over his farm, and he's going to do it. If you have 6 children, each one of them is going to get 1/6 of the farm that he had. I'm going to switch to a particular log preference thing, which just makes all the math easier, and this is going to be the. So the guy wants to maximize this, but he's got to divide his production, which is AX alpha. That's how much he can produce with his own skills, and he's going to split some of this on his own consumption, and KN on K is how much he spends of goods on his children. So I can just work this out. It's a simple exercise. And determine how much children he has. You can get a little formula out of this model, and that's what it looks like. Now, I'm mostly going to be thinking about farming as some big shot owns the land, and the guys we're worrying about are landless workers. We can split this up. That would give you. That would be the formula for the landless worker. And he's the one I'm going to be spending most of my time on. And I'm going to kind of forget about the landowner. All right, so this is a single worker's decision problem. Now I want to think about a whole population of guys exactly like him. There's a certain amount of fixed land, and then the little n is how many kids he has. Everybody's going to have, and big N is how many people there are. So next period we've got big N times little n is the population that next period. So we're going to get a model of dynamics of population growth. And you can write down that as a difference equation, which I'm not. And this thing is going to tend to a steady state. And this population is going to settle down to everybody's producing, every family's producing 2 children, or every person is producing 1 children. So it's a stable, sustainable, steady state. This is the Malthusian model, and I'm really giving it as I got it from David Ricardo. It's not really people starving to death. I mean, they have some standards for child care, and that determines how big the population is going to be relative to the land. So this is a Malthusian theory gets a lot of weird comments. This has nothing to do with lemmings or breeding themselves into starvation or something like that. But animals don't do that either. This is, rabbits don't breed like rabbits either. They settle down to a constant level depending on these same issues. And Malthus just applied that to human society. And it works like a dream. This is the best, I think this is the most, macroeconomics' finest hour, is Malthus explains why the world, even though the world has places that are very, like Java or South China, which are just heaven for human beings, sunny, wet, and then there are people living on the Sahara Desert or up in the Arctic Ocean, and those people are all about the same income level. So the rich places, what just have many more people. People keep breeding more until they get down to the same level as the Eskimos. That really is a prediction, So you got to respect Malthus, just as Darwin and other hard scientists respected Malthus' idea. And I'll come back to that. So that's one. If you think about a Malthusian society in itself, that I've done. That's all I'm going to tell you. So now I just want to switch gears entirely because I want to get to the Industrial Revolution and think about another equally stripped down situation. I'm going to think about a group of literate people. I think of them as urban. I think of them as not holding any land. They're people who live by their wits. Are they scientists? Well, their scientists are in there for sure, but the group is way too broad. I'm thinking of terms like bourgeoisie, intelligentsia, traders, merchants, middlemen. They're people who wheel and deal, who think about what they're, try to come up with new ideas and stay ahead of the competition. They're the people we read about from people like David Landis or Joel Mokyr, Avner Greif, a new book by Svi Eckstein and Maristella Bottacini. These are all books about cultures of people who are living by their wits, who produce goods by thinking better than other people do. Now, is this something that came about in the Industrial Revolution? No, not at all. There've been. Bottacini and Eckstein ends in 1492, so there's no Industrial Revolution in there. There's always been people who've been traders, middlemen. You can go back to prehistory, I think, and so this is not enough to create an Industrial Revolution, but it's got to be where the Industrial Revolution got created, and I want to think about how did that work. I'm going to give a role for schooling here, but it's a pretty routine thing, and people go to school here. So if I look at the Bellman equation for these people, you got the same C, the same N, and they leave something over for their children, but what they leave over is not land. They don't have any land. They leave them their IQ or their human capital. I treat that as they give up some of their own money or production in order to finance schooling for the kid. Instead of, you were talking about the fraction of consumption rather than there's a little bit of a switch, and there's a switch I take, here I'm taking very close to a paper that Becker, Murphy, and Tamura did in 1990. In fact, this is just what they wrote down, pretty much. Now, the way I've written this down, there's this e to the gamma times v, and that means that people's incomes in this particular society are growing at some rate depending on gamma. and I've just treated gamma as something that's just there. And that's where I'm going to leave it. But, but I want to tell you about something. There's a lot of work going on, and I'm doing some of it, is to talk about some endogenous growth setting where people are growing. Well, so this gamma is not just a given thing, but something that is generated by the activity of these wheeler-dealers. There's a bunch of people working on that I've listed. If you look at a balanced growth path in this kind of world, you can get you notice that I got gamma over theta on the left-hand side, and then I got e to the minus gamma over theta on the right-hand side. This is a possible steady state, except that for the growth rate in gamma. And here's the picture that comes out of this. If I follow this, if I look at that, try to draw that picture, I'm getting. So I got a 45-degree line as the black curve. The curve always passes through 0. That's always a possible steady state for these guys. 0 meaning I'm trying to measure the growth rate. And then in the red curve, you see that there's another crossing way up there, a positive crossing. And in the blue curve, you see there's a negative crossing. Well, you don't have negative growth. I think the ones that are interesting are the blue curve is going to get you at 0, and the red curve is going to get you to something, 0.05 or something. Now, what's the difference between these two? These guys are getting ideas from other people. They're interacting with other people at some rate. That rate is, I'm calling it alpha. And the alpha rate, those guys are meeting people faster or processing information faster. People like that are going to end up in the high curve, and the other guys are going to end up in the 0 curve. So it's a model where you have two possible steady states, one of which has no growth. All the people and their activities are the same here, but just different magnitudes. You got some people who are steady state combination, and then you got some of the others who are getting sustained growth year in, year out. Now this takes some work to get this picture, to justify what it means and that kind of stuff. And I've used lots of papers on that because I keep making mistakes and somebody has to get somebody to straighten them out for me, and we'll keep trying till you get it right. Anyway, what I like about this is that that we need a tipping point here. We want to have some idea of where did it come from. This stagnant group of people are all of a sudden growing at a constant rate forever, so that this gives me a story, and a story that makes sense. Makes better sense than I'm making for you tonight because I'm running out of time. All right, so we got two economies we're talking about: a land-based Malthusian economy, where people are living at subsistence level, and we got a human capital-based economy with sustained productivity growth as one possibility, and stagnation as another, depending on certain parameter values. So here's our dual economy. That's what Ted Schultz would have called it. Except to put them in the same economy, I'm going to have to let them move back and forth. Now the human capital-based guys, the way I've set it up, they're totally independent. So once you get into that situation of living off your human capital, you never stop, and you never send anybody back to the farm, and your kids are always literate urban dwellers. So the only action here, the only decisions we have are really for the farm, for the people on the farm. So we're going to end up, what we want to end up with is some kind of dynamics which is going to include the incomes of people and also the populations. So pure population is an active feature of this model, population growth. All right, how much notation do I want to do for you? We're talking about population growth now. So I need symbols for population. So NCT is the number of people of the urban population at day T, and NFT is the farm population at day T. And the migration is going to be from rural to urban. And meanwhile, I'm going to simplify even more and say that guys in the urban people, there are a constant number of them. They each have one. They can have any constant growth rate you want. I'm going to pick the growth rate of 1 for these guys, just to keep it simple. And they're growing. Things are growing at a rate beta gamma t. Gamma is the rate of growth of the system, and beta is how much is your the parameter that tells you how much you care about your kids, their quality. Those two things determine some growing, constant growth for people in the urban sector. Now these guys we're going to let the other guys migrate to that sector. So what are they going to do when they get there? We got to say something about that. So for starters, here's what's going to happen. The rich urban guys, they like to have cleaning ladies and guys who haul out the garbage and stuff like that. They want to have services of unskilled people. So the guys from the farm are going to leave. They're not going to be farmers anymore, but they're not going to be human capital accumulators either. There's just going to be a market for servants. What determines is how many people go into that, leave the farm and go into that service sector. And then there's a question of what's the demand for service from the point of view of the urban dwellers, because my early story about the urban dwellers didn't have any demand for servants. So we'll just change that much in the model. We're trying to weld two different models together into a single piece, and here's a piece. See what I'm saying? All right, now I said we're going to assume that the number of people in the wealthy, literate urban people, that those guys have a constant growth. So that's well, basically, I'm just going to get a supply and demand is all we're doing to decide how to allocate people, how the farmers allocate themselves between working on the farm and working for urban people. And what's going to keep it going is that there's diminishing returns on the farm. So as more people leave the farm, the higher the wage rate, the higher the marginal product of capital in that thing, and that keeps going up to keep some people on the farm and some people move. And then as the guys in the urban sector get richer and richer, more and more people are going to be draining out of the farm, but never to leave it. Because I got a Cobb-Douglas production function where some guys, there's never going to be the last guy to turn off the lights on that farm. This is like a paper of Prescott's and Gary Hansen that it's pretty much what I'm adopting to here. All right, you don't want to see this. So now I got, okay. Okay, so we got this static allocation of people between two possible jobs, or the unskilled people. But for the dynamics, we also want to know what's going on with population growth. And these unskilled guys, they still have no quality aspect to their children. They're just going to start having more kids. They keep getting better jobs as servants as time passes. They love kids, so bring them on. So now we're going to get a movement in which NA equal FT does the number of unskilled people who work on the farm is going to zero. Number of people. A is increasing. As people leave, the wage rate is going to infinity. So this little sketch gives us the emptying out of the traditional agriculture that I started the talk with. I mean, it's easy to concoct this, and I just did it. But here we're also talking about fertility choice. These unskilled people still have nothing to endow their kids with, so they're just going for more kids. And it's just exactly as in section 1. So they're just blindly multiplying themselves. They're trying to drive down to get back to that Malthusian steady state, but they get richer and richer, so they have more and more kids. So this can't be all there is to it, huh? I mean, you think about I showed you the picture. Well, we'll get back to Nigeria at the end of the talk. But what we gotta do to get away from this particular conclusion, which is to let some of these guys get educated, which means, in my case, their parents have got to pony up the money to educate them. So now if I'm a poor person, you can decide whether I want to have lots of kids, or whether I want to cut back on the number of kids, and maybe cut back on my personal consumption as a parent, and use the difference to get to get enough money together to get my child up to speed as a literate urbanite. Now, of course, there's going to be, in reality, there's going to be lots of people at different levels of this thing, maybe just several generations. But for me, I'm just going to make it happen all at once because I don't want to have too many variables here. All right. How are we going to close this model? Well, the way I've described it, there are people who in the farm who stay there always. The numbers are changing. There are people who move to the city and stay there. But anybody can go either way. So they got to have equal. People have to be coin tossed between whether I want to stay on the farm or move to the city. And so now it's true that the low-skilled people have nothing to hand to give to their children, but they still get pleasure out of their children's good fortune. To get at the benefits people get from this, it involves not just your choice variables, but things that are happening in the equilibrium of the model you're living in, So you can solve for it. You know, you kind of just wonder why equations like this are put up on the board. But I'm trying to work out that we really can find a determinate, you know, indifference between staying and moving for this particular subset, and we can do that. We can get some formulas, and we can calculate the rate at which the farm people leave the farm. Now people are, it's no longer true that the number of people, educated people are a fixed number. They're getting more people all the time. So it's kind of a race between you know, the guys who are still left are still having massive numbers of children, but there's fewer and fewer of them, and in the end, you get the demographic transition. You can see the demographic transition there if you write out the details. The initial effect of this migration is massive numbers of children, and then as time passes and people are moved from the illiterate to the literate section, you're gradually getting fewer and fewer of these people. And I think you can kind of see this stuff. You can see models like South Korea, where the whole damn society got educated in one generation. And there it is, or you see it in Hong Kong, or in Taiwan. So these Asian countries have kind of got that. Once you show up in Seoul or Taipei, we'll put you in. This is not just the parents who are doing it now. It takes the government activities to make sure this is possible, but it's a huge thing. Now, if you look at countries like Nigeria, who are rich because they inherited the oil that was there in their land when the British were running the show. Now some very rich Nigerians have got that oil, but they don't. They're still not living with their wits. They're the analog to these farmers, who own the landowners. If you look at, or if you look at some place like Brazil, where large masses of people living in these favelas, maybe this has been eased up since I've been there, but people just coming into the city and figure out something when I get there, and then there's no government or there's no real way to get. You're not much closer to literacy if you're living in the favela than you were if you were still up in the northern part of Brazil. So there's a whole range of possibilities, and I'm not going to trace them out in this paper. But for me, then, this main part of the story is literacy, and literacy generally means urban. Your schooling is important if you're hanging out with smart kids, smart parents. It's hard to get those things in the village. Well, the U.S. did pretty well with. So, what was the Industrial Revolution for me? We used to think about it as factories, coal, steel, sweatshops, and all those things are still around in some places in Europe. But the main issue, I think the main consequences, is the emergence of this bourgeoisie, if you like, who are just constantly creating new things out of nothing, out of their own ingenuity. They're spending their days talking to other people, arguing, communicating with other like-minded people. They're generating wealth and production. And it turns out, of course, Marx thought that these guys were deluding themselves and they'd be driven back down to the Malthusian equilibrium, which is what I would have thought too in 1848 if they'd asked me. But it didn't work out that way. This chain of people producing ideas is endless, it seems to me, or at least so far so good. And the whole lives have been changed, as everyone knows. So the traditional agriculture, it's a dead end. It's already over for much of the world, and the sooner the better for the rest of them. I'm not talking about ends of farming. I mean, you have massive amounts of farming in the United States or Argentina with, 2% of the labor force involved. But the traditional agriculture is just, I think the idea that you can prettify this lifestyle in some way is patronizing and just plain wrong. You want to get your kids out of the village and into the city and hope for the best when you get there. That's what happened in South Korea and Taiwan, and the sooner it happens to Africa and Southeast Asia, I think the better off we'll all be. Okay. I've totally lost track of the time, so
No idea what the time limit was.
I'm up for questions or comments if.
Yeah, so we open up for questions. More questions?
Yeah.
On the model of the traditional sector, the agricultural sector, I was thinking that there are some societies, agricultural societies, like for example here in Catalonia, that use the model would be, I think, quite different. For example, families try to provide, to transmit the land to one of the sons, to preserve the unit of production, etc. Right? And so, how do you think this other traditional agricultural model could fit with the Malthusian idea today?
Yeah, those models are just to keep the complications within bounds, so I can actually work out the answers. And Becker's actually used that all the time as well. You treat all that. Of course, there are lots of situations where you kill the kid, you leave him on a mountain somewhere, you put him in the priesthood. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of things you can do, and they only have one left over to sure. But do you think that's going to make a big change in the kind of conclusions?
I am asking how it may. I was thinking aloud. I don't have the.
What I've done here, I haven't even mentioned the wealthy people. I've said there's some landowners, but they're not. But in the model I've worked out, the landowners are they're just collectors of other people's labor. Maybe they. So I really haven't thought about that at all. But I agree that the people owning land like to keep the property. I had that in my little model too, but they all had the same property. You know what I mean?
I guess the technology in agricultural must be important. Not exactly what assumptions.
Yeah, I mean they're stuff like colonial America where everybody's a family-owned farm, and a lot of people and there are a lot of them educated. I mean, John Adams had a, law practice and learned how many languages and so on when he was a farmer in Massachusetts. Those kind of things are exceptions. The U.S. is kind of an exception on that regard. We also had a good system of, according to Claudia Golden, unusually good system of schools for people at small towns as well as urban, I mean, there's a lot of exceptions. I'm just trying to keep it down to something I can handle.
Ramon had a question. More questions?
As you know now, we had this discussion with Bob Gordon about getting into secular stagnation.
Yeah.
Do you think that this helps us to get into that discussion? What's your view?
All right. People like me, and there's lots of us, talking about the future, talking about economic growth. We're struck by the fact that it is more or less stable, after 150 years at least in the U.S. and the U.K., you get this pretty stable growth rate. I'm not talking about recessions, but I'm talking about over this decades growth rate. So we just say, well, we can write down a model that says it's going to happen forever. So that's what I do. Do I know? I don't know anything about that for sure. There's economic theory doesn't tell me. So I'm not going to look down my nose at Gordon. For it's not like there's some counter example for it. But Gordon's a little too, I don't know, he's too fussy about what's progress. I mean, like, he doesn't think Facebook is progress, or he probably didn't think the Beatles is progress. But those guys produce massive amounts of GDP. Maybe Bob doesn't like that stuff, but people are buying it, eager to get their advertisements on the Facebook. That's what we mean by productivity in this world, not just machines and so I don't see how Bob can. I'm glad about flush toilets. I really think they're way more important than Facebook. But it's not a if for which do you want to choose? We can keep the toilets and then do what you want to. So I think Bob's a little. Economic theory does not tell us anything about what creative people, not in our field, creative people are going to come up with next year. I mean, that's just not what economics is about. And so I don't feel sad about that, like we made some awful mistake or something like that. It would be ridiculous. You can barely figure out what I'm going to do tomorrow, let alone what the world is going to be like. I also think it's a mistake to look at to be too techy about this stuff. I mean, everything we have, everything in our detergent we use, the way we brush our teeth, everything we have gets better and better and better every year, just way better. When you start thinking about the first time you shaved, I remember just the blood pouring off my 13-year-old face, and then you'd finish shaving, you'd have to throw away the curve because the next time it would just. So now you can get the same shaving. They're immortal. They just live forever. I mean, it seems like a lot of what progress is little things. You've got all these people who are trying to make a buck by getting something a little bit better than it was yesterday, and they're doing it, and I love it.
Some questions? Andreu? Andreu, I think.
Going to your initial question, why did it happen in Britain in the
Yeah.
18th century? I think I got an idea,
Yeah.
but let me change the question. Why didn't it happen during the Roman Empire? Why didn't it happen in China in the 12th or 13th century?
You see, okay, what I had, the closest thing I had to timing was to say, you get to a point where there's two equilibria. Why do we get to that point in a particular place? I mean, well, we can talk about that, but I didn't in this paper, I agree. These are all, what was the Roman Empire? This is 90% of the people that are operating on farms. Now, if you've got a farmer, you got to have somebody protecting you, because otherwise somebody's going to come in and harvest my crop while I'm, you know. So you need. So what the Romans do, they're basically collecting other people's, the rents from other people's. They're thugs. You can read about this in the New Testament. Well, you know, I read the New Testament before you do. You know, the tax detectors are hated by everybody. Why? Well, because they come into your town and take half your production, and say, if you don't like it, we'll kill you. That's how I think of the Roman Empire. That's the way I think about the Greek Empire. I mean, Thucydides is talking about the guys from Athens are coming out and they pull up in some little island and just say, hand over your so many goods, it will kill you. That's what that's what life was. And how do we need these guys? Well, I need a protector. So I got to have somebody who's going to take stuff. I only hope to get. It seems to me that's the world we're talking about. Now I agree that when you go and listen to Plato's dialogue or something like that, he sounds very refined and it's all very nice. But I believe all that stuff is built on just plain thievery, sort of. Or I don't know about China, but China is also a fabulously rich production era. A lot of people thought they'd come into China to take a piece of it, so you got to have an army and some people who I'm not giving you a lot of knowledge, but I'm just giving you the way I think things worked then and are still working now in some parts of the world.
Professor Lucas, I think your presentation was extremely clear what the Industrial Revolution meant for the human history along centuries, and I think that probably most of the students could follow the fantastic mathematical formulas that you have presented. My question is more, it is clear that the Industrial Revolution and industry is so important to the growth of GDP and the value added in the economy. But what is, from your point of view, right now the importance of industry, not only in developing countries but in already developed countries like Europe, North America, Japan, and others? What is the importance of industry now that we are facing the fourth industrial revolution based on technology?
Yeah, I'm not counting the different. Like I said, the Beatles are part of the industrial revolution. From anybody who produces stuff that other people like and are willing to pay for, I call that productivity. And so does the national income and product accounts of the United States. So heavy metals and that kind of stuff. I mean, heavy metals in the sense of steel. That's not part of the story. Look, what I think about, we still got 2/3 of the population of the world or something like that who's still back. If this sketch of the Industrial Revolution is right, then we're only like halfway there, or a third of the way there, or something like that. That's what seems to me to be interesting. And it just seems to me like what's going to happen, we get this huge difference between the richest and the poorest countries. it's going to have, that's got to come to an end. It's going to be like the model I just described for a single economy. You're going to get more and more people involved in education and in sort of jobs that lead somewhere. And pretty soon we're all going to be equal, just like we were back in 1750. More or less, I mean, in terms of society. So how could it possibly be that a bunch of Europeans are going to be permanently, 10 times richer than a bunch of non-Europeans? It never used to be the case. It just seems like an unnatural situation to me. So I'm not too worried about whether, I mean, from that point of view, it seems like the issues between how things are going this month in the Europe and the United States just isn't that important. We're rich. Everybody should be like us. Wants to be like us.
Let me ask you one thing related to that. In the view of these sustainable growth models and that you have presented and migrations, you think that the shock of migration that is leaving Europe is good news or is bad news? Is it the migrants' shock that happens in Europe, which is not something that comes out. Is it going to be good news for the sustainable growth possibilities or not?
Oh, the refugee guys are a different situation.
Exactly.
But we've had pretty good luck in the States with immigration in the past. I'm sort of sorry to see it cut off, but maybe it's inevitable because the welfare system is so much better. The whole countries would be better off if they came here and went on a welfare.
But you have the Mexicans. You have the Mexicans flow, and here we have the migrants flow.
Let them flow.
So,
I love those guys. Was it for the Mexicans? Chicago wouldn't exist.
I think this is a shock that can be one that would raise the sustainable growth potential of Europe or in the United States. Or you think that has nothing to do with it?
But the United States, every group that came over from the Irish and the Italians and the Russian Jews and so on, people thought they were, deficient people. They weren't quite smart. It's just all this myths about and they all just now they help build the country. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what.
Well, you had these charts in which the model of the industrial revolution and the divergence between the GDP growth and the people's growth in the U.S. was a little bit different from the ones in Europe. That's probably explained by the migrants, by the migrant flow that was in the United States that was not there in Europe. So.
Well, the same. There's mountains of interesting stuff I skipped over. This is a pretty crude description.
So I think there's another, maybe last question.
Now the students finish it off. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's certainly an inspiration. A question I have is, what would happen if you think about young people as securities rather than as...
I just can't talk.
So I have to speak louder, sorry.
Yeah.
What would happen if you think about young people as securities rather than thinking about education as kind of an asset? Just because, for example, in developing countries, a lot of parents face the choice whether they keep their children to make sure that the capital they produce is maintained or whether they send them off for schooling. So, and then on top of that, you have a very high mortality rate. So a lot of children are dying just along the way, thus not supporting the family sufficiently on the field. So how would this change the model if you considered this?
Alexander Hamilton, one of his writings, said that one of the things he liked about manufacturing in the cities was because you could get the kids just to work earlier in the manufacturing than you can on the farm. So I don't think I mean, he was a tough cookie, that guy, but I don't think there's any special reason for keeping people on the farm, is what I'm trying to say. And having them, I think I'm missing your point there.
Well, thank you very much. It's been,
Okay.
it has been very challenging for
Right.
us to think at the industrial revolution, steady states, migrants, in the way that you have exposed. Thank you very much, and to have your home here. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you all for coming.